Hello photographers, today we're going to be talking about working with flash in full sun. And I'm sitting in full high noon sun right now, and as you can see it's pretty harsh and pretty terribly unflattering. And there are going to be times when you find yourself trying to take photographs in light like this. And often we go to flash to balance out the harshness and directness of the light that we're working with and fill in the shadows and make an image that is pleasing to us. But before we talk about using the flash, we have to look at the light we are dealing with, the ambient light, the light from the sun. So the first thing to consider is the direction of that light. Now I am currently recording this video at high noon. Most of us think that that means the sun is directly above us, but that's not actually true. It is true that the sun is at its zenith. It's at the highest point that it's going to get in the sky. But I live in the state of Wisconsin, which is in the northern part of the United States. And what that means is the sun is actually coming from my right. So it's not shooting directly down at me, but if you look at the highlights on my face, you can see that the sun is coming from this high but rightward angle down across me. So in a situation like this, one of the very easy things you can do is put the sun directly on the subject. Now that we've changed positions, you can see that the sun is lighting the full front of my face. But if you look at my eyes and you look underneath my chin here, you can see that there are dark shadows because the sun is high up in the sky. It is not directly above me, but it's high enough that my brow is casting a shadow on my eyes, that my chin is casting a shadow on my chest. Now, a lot of people say to alleviate that, you can take something like a piece of white foam core and put it underneath your subject to bounce some light back up into their face. The problem with that is you're now underlighting your subject. And if you've ever taken a flashlight and shown it up from underneath into your face, you know that that's not the most flattering style of light. Sure, it can help eliminate some of those shadows, but it's not very flattering. So this isn't something you're really going to want to do. What you can do, however, is bounce some light in from one side or another to try to fill in some of those shadows. And a third option is to scrim your subject. I just put a piece of black foam core in between me and the sun. But now I am pretty evenly lit. I have basically put myself in what's called open shade. Because while this is directly blocking the light, there is still light that is illuminating me. And if I adjusted my camera settings to expose me better, I would look pretty decent in this light. In fact, let's do that. So here I've just adjusted my aperture. I've opened it up to lighten me up entirely. The issue with this, however, is of course the fact that the background behind me is still quite bright because the sun is hitting that directly. What I've done here is something that you can do in larger part by moving your subject in your camera into open shade. And open shade is just a place where the sun isn't directly on your subject. As an example, if you look over here to my left, you can see there's a great big patch of shade on the ground cast by the eave of my garage. We're gonna go over there and we're gonna take a look at what the light looks like. Now I'm here in the open shade, and this is pretty good. There's still a bit of harshness on this background behind me, but like the main background behind me, the trees and the other stuff, is also more in shadow, and so everything looks fairly good in this light. Now, we're what, 2, 3, 4 minutes maybe into this video, and I haven't even talked about using your flash yet. But the reason I haven't is because you have to be smart about using your flash in the sun. Because if you just go out into the sun and you turn on your flash and you try to take some photos, you are going to struggle to get the look that you want. A good photographer is going to consider every light source that they're dealing with and how they can use that. Now, one of the other things we need to talk about is the reflection of the sunlight. A perfect example is what's happening on this side of my face over here. That part of my house and the concrete over here to my left is catching full sun, and some of that light is bouncing back up and illuminating me on this side of my body. Now, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it's something that you're going to want to watch out for and pay attention to. Here's what I mean. Right now, all of this rim light on my head is bouncing mostly off of the house behind me. And if I take this piece of black foam core and I put it behind my head, you can see that rim light disappears. When I take it away, that rim light comes back. If I move it back here behind my shoulder, the rim light on my shoulder disappears as well, and there it comes back. So what that means is the side of my house back here behind me is a rim light in this shot that I'm creating right here. You need to pay attention to where all of the light is coming from, not just the direction of the sun, but what the sun is bouncing and reflecting off of and coming into your shot. Once you've fully evaluated your main light, that being the sun and wherever the sun is bouncing off of, you need to then consider what you want to do with your flash. So let's do that. Once you have your subject positioned in the sun to take as much advantage as you can of either open shade or direct sun and reflective light, you need to bring your camera in and you need to manage the exposure of that ambient light. So I'm shooting here with the Olympus OMD EM5 Mark II, and I'm just going to take a selfie here. We are set at ISO 200, which is the base ISO of this camera. And I'm using 1/250th of a second, which is my camera's sync speed. And I have my aperture set to f16 because I am deliberately trying to underexpose the sun, the ambient light. Control all of this exposure here on this side of my face, bring this down somewhat, and make all of the background behind me a little bit less prominent in the image. So I'm just going to take a quick selfie here, and we'll see what this looks like. Here's the image right here, and you can see that what we've done here is manage that light pretty darn well. There's still direct sun hitting the right side of my head, face, and body, and I'm still lit pretty well, but the background now has been diminished greatly. In fact, maybe a bit too much. I want to be able to see some of the trees and stuff in the background, so we're going to open that aperture up. We're going to take that aperture to f8 and take another shot. And now at f8, it's a call, because now the building is starting to get a little bit too bright. So I think we'll take that aperture and we'll make it a little bit smaller. We'll go to f11. And I think at f11 we've got a decent balance. Again, as we look at this image, there's a lot of shadow on the left side of my face. This is now where we can bring the flash in to manage this and balance flash with ambient light. So let me grab my speed light. I have here the Godox TT600 speed light and an umbrella. And what I'm going to do is position this light over here to camera right and up with the umbrella pointing down to light up this side of me. So I'm going to turn on this light, and I'm actually controlling the light with the Godox R2 Pro radio trigger on top of my camera. This flash is currently set to group C. I'm going to switch it into group A. And then here on my trigger control, I'm going to set the power of the flash to, we'll start with 1/8 power. And with that set, I'll put on the umbrella and then we can take a photo. Again, I want to position this over here so that it's going to fill in this side of my face. Now 1/8 might seem quite bright, but I'm also at f11 on the camera. That's going to block a substantial amount of light. So let's see what this gives us. This is pretty good, but there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, there's still some deep shadows in my cheeks because of my smile. And to alleviate that, I'm actually going to turn into this light more. I could also move this light more to the front, but since you're right here, I'm going to turn my face into that light. And since I'm turning my face into the light, I'm actually also going to move the camera over here. And this is something to consider when you're taking photos like this. And that is a much better photo, as you can see, because now there's light filling in my face, bringing up those shadows. I'm a little bit squinty because it is bright out here, but you are getting catch lights in my eyes from this. And no, this selfie of me isn't the most amazing portrait, but the principles of this process are what's really important here. Now, the other thing you might be wondering about is, what about using high-speed sync? Well, you can certainly use high-speed sync. I didn't have to in this situation because I have more room to turn up the power in my flash and I'm already happy with the results that I'm getting. But if you want to use high-speed sync, then you just turn on high-speed sync and you use it. The principle of balancing everything out remains the same. And I did this in direct noontime sun, which is arguably one of the hardest times to balance flash and sunlight together, and I was able to do it with a speed light pretty easily. But there are going to be some cases where that won't work. As an example, you might want to shoot a super wide aperture to get that bokeh and blur out the background. That's a case where you'd want to activate the high speed sync so that you could increase that shutter speed to balance out the effect of opening up the aperture to let in more sunlight. Or maybe you do what I talked about earlier. You move into open shade like I was earlier in the shot. And maybe you don't need flash at all. Or maybe you do need flash, but it's just a little bit of fill light off to camera right or camera left. The point is that balancing flash and sun is not terribly difficult. What you need to do is just understand the basic process of evaluating and managing your ambient light by positioning your subject in a good spot, looking at where the sunlight is coming from and what the sunlight is reflecting off of. And then after doing that, managing the exposure of that ambient light and using your flash to fill in where you want that fill. And if you have any questions about this, let me know down in the comments. And if you're interested in learning more about flash photography, check out my free flash photography guide right here, and then get out there and take some damn photos.